Hey guys, this is Nevir and welcome to this video on how to play 3-bet pots out of position. So in the last videos we saw how to play 3-bet pots in position. We saw the sizing, the frequency, the exploits, how to play the turns, but now you're probably wondering how we should play out of position. So the first mistake that I see too often when I play low stakes is that people see bet too small at really high frequency. And usually what happens is that they just keep the sizing they use in position and they just use it out of position, which is usually a big mistake. On ace-high board, as you can see here, in position you should bet 25% pot, and out of position you should also see bet 25% pot. So this is the only type of board where you're gonna have the same sizing, otherwise you will need to increase your c-bet sizing out of position. On king-high board, as you can see here, it was 25% to half in position. Now, as you can see, it's gonna be 40% to 2/3, so we are gonna have to bet bigger. Same for queen high board, it was 25 to 50%, now it's half to 2/3. Jack high board, it was not more than half, now it's 2/3 to 100%. So let's say 3-bet pots, small blind against button, Jack 9-3 rainbow, you should actually c-bet 100% on the flop, I believe. So you're definitely gonna have to increase your c-bet sizing. 10 high boards, 2/3 as well. Low disconnected boards, half to 2/3. And low connected boards, you're gonna have really big sizings, but you're gonna check at really high frequency. Let's say flop is 7-4-3, you're gonna check 80% of the time, and when you bet the other 20%, you're gonna use a really big sizing. So forget about the 1/3 c-bet range, it was probably a mistake even in position on some textures, and it's even worse now that we are out of position. Since we are out of position, we need to use larger sizing to maximize fold equity. If you bet 1/3 against me out of position, I will have so many easy calls that would be so much harder to make if you bet just a bit bigger. Let's say small blind against button, flop 10-5 deuce, and you bet 1/3, I will be able to call king 9 suited, ace 8 suited, ace jack off. I will be able to call so much stuff. But if you bet half to 2/3 on the flop, I will have such tough spots with the hands I mentioned. But we will also need to check at really high frequency, and this is where it gets interesting. I know most of you guys don't use this strategy and it works really well, so we will talk about the check raising strategy. So I got some stats from Hand to Notes, and these stats are from Mobius Poker, so as always, check out his YouTube channel and his website. So these stats are the reaction of the in-position player when we check raise the flop. So small blind against button, you 3-bet small blind, the button calls, flop whatever you want, you decide to check, your opponent bets, and you check raise. How does the population play against the check raise? So the first one is the reaction against the check raise from all type of players, so the regs, the nit, the fish, whatever you want, but also in any position, because later we will see button against small blind, but this one is from any position. So how to read these stats? When the out of position player checks, the in position player will lead, then we will check raise, and this is how your opponent reacts. So as you can see, this means bet fold, so he will lead the flop and fold against the check raise. Bet call, he will bet the flop and call the check raise. Bet raise, he will lead the flop and raise against the check raise. So as you can see, when the population leads the flop for 1/3 and he gets check raised 3.5x, he will overfold by 10%. He should fold 35% at equilibrium and he will fold 45%. Same if we check raise a bit smaller as well. He leads 1/3, we check raise only 2.5x and he will overfold by 7%. When the population bets 50% on the flop and we check raise, they actually fold less and also jam more. He should only 3-bet the flop 16, but he's gonna 3-bet the flop 21. What does it mean? He folds less and jam more, which means that the bet 50 is stronger. Every time you see someone lead 50 on the flop, you should under check raise and overfold because his range is stronger. But when they do bet 1/3, as you can see, it will be pretty weak. Also, you can notice that still when they bet 1/3 and get check raised, they will fast play a bit more than GTO. So this is the same concept that applies that when we were talking about the second barrel on the turn in 3-bet pot. So if your opponent is gonna fast play a lot, you should bet really polarized. You should bet hands that don't really care if they get 3-bets. So let's say flop is 10-5 deuce. You check out of position, the opponent leads, and you have ace-8 suited. Why not check raising? Because if your opponent 3-bet the flop, then, you know, you have nothing, so you can just fold and that's okay. But let's say 10-5 deuce and you have ace-4 suited. If you check raise and you get 3-bet, you're gonna have to fold a bit more equity, which sucks. So definitely you're gonna have to bet more polarized because they fast play too much and you don't want to get your equity denied. But you can have a lot of bluffs because they still overfold by 10%. So this one is the button's reaction against the small blind check raise from all type of players. So you 3-bet in the small blind against button, the button calls, flop is whatever you want, you check, he bets, you check raise, this is the stats you are looking for. And as you can see, same thing applies, the button will be overfolding, he will fast play a bit too much, but he will be overfolding by a lot. It's 12% here and 13% against the 3.5x check raise. So again, you will have to check raise a lot because they will be overfolding. As you can see, I decided to put the fish and its reaction as well as the regs reaction. But as you can see here, we don't have a really big sample, so maybe the data don't mean too much. That's why I also showed this sample because as you can see, we have a lot of hands, but here we don't have a big sample. But still, against the fish and the nits, as you can see, they will be overfolding. Now, for the regs, they will be folding even more. So I think the regs know that when we check as the out of position player, we will check fold too much because we like to see bet. When you have aces on 10-8-5, you're not gonna check because why would you check? You have aces, right? But when you have ace jack suited and you're like, do I really want to bet? I don't know, I check, and then it will lead too much and you will have to check call or check fold too much. So the regs know that they will lead at really high frequency, which means that you want to check raise against the regs. They will think you have a strong range when you check raise, whereas you will be bluffing most of the time. As you can see, they will be overfolding by 20%, but still keep in mind, this is a low sample, so yeah, but you can definitely see that it's always blue here. They just overfold too much when we check raise. So because the population overfolds against check raise, maybe c-betting becomes just worse than check raising and we should actually check at really high frequency and then check raise. So let's do it. So this is 3-bet pot, small blind against button, flop is 10-8-3 rainbow. As you can see, the small blind should still c-bet at really high frequency for a big size. But let's try to see if we make the button overfold against the check raise, maybe the small blind will start checking more often because he wants to check raise instead of c-betting. So we make the small blind check. Button will lead for 25% pot. Let's make it lead 1/3. People like to lead 1/3. We should check raise 35%. So he bets 8 big blind and we check raise 22. So it's a mix of the 2.5 and 3.5x. I think it's pretty good. We decide to check raise, and now let's look at the button's reaction against the check raise. So imagine yourself, you're in the small blind, you check raise against the button. He should actually 3-bet jam all in queen 10 suited, queen jack suited. It's not happening. Never ace queen suited, like what the fuck, 8-9 suited, 7-8. But he should also call some hands, some random king 9 of clubs, some king jack suited. All the king jack suited should actually call the flop with the backdoor flush draw. It's never happening. They will overfold those hands. Okay, so I decreased from 14% to 10%, and I will make him overfold because, yeah, it definitely doesn't call king jack suited 100% of the time. So we saw that they overfold by 10%, so I will increase the fold frequency by 10%. As you can expect, the small blind will check raise 100%. So imagine yourself, you're on the small blind, you don't know if you want to c-bet or check, you're gonna be able to check and check raise 100%. You have pocket sixes, you check raise and it will make a lot of money. But now the question we asked ourselves before was, is the small blind gonna check at really high frequency now that he knows that check raising makes a lot of money? Let's see. Yeah, as you can see, the small blind, when we get to the flop, it was c-betting 70% of the time. But now that we made the button make a big mistake against check raise, we see that we just don't bet anymore. We just check raise at really high frequency. Also, some of you will ask, oh, but what am I gonna do when I get called? Because you will get called 50% of the time. And it's the same as in the 3-bet pots. You will have to give up, and that's okay because your opponent made such a big mistake on the flop. As you can see, on the turn, when you get called and the turn is a brick, you just check 100% of the time. And I think it works really well when you have aces, kings, queens. I think that's a good play. You know what I mean? You're going to induce some bluffs. When it goes check on the turn, you can bluff, you can value bet. So I think it's a totally fine strategy. Let's see on the king, maybe you will keep betting on the king. You should go actually all in on the king. What the fuck? I didn't expect that, but yeah, I guess it's like a pot size bet. So yeah, so as you can see, you should do a lot of check raise, and when you get caught, it's okay. You just check, you keep bluffing on the good cards, and you will do perfectly fine. Yo guys, I was doing the video editing of this video and I just realized that I forgot to talk about something really important, so I will do it right now. We also need to think about how does the population play when it goes check on the flop. So we know we can check raise really high frequency. We can c-bet big at really high frequency as well on some textures. But how does it work when it goes check on the flop? And these stats are the reason why you should actually go for check raise even more, because they play so much worse when it goes check on the flop and you lead the turn. And I won't waste too much time on that, but as you can see, this is all blue. So every time it goes check on the flop, you check in the small blind, your opponent checks back on the button, and you bet the turn. As you can see, he will overfold against any sizing. So if you bet 1/3 on the turn, he will overfold by 4%. If you bet 50%, he will overfold by 9, I believe. If you bet 70%, he will overfold by 14%. And if you bet 100% pot, it will fold by 50%. So your strategy should actually, sometimes you're going to have to bet big on some textures, that's 100% sure. But if you go for a check, you can profitably bluff the turn because they will just overfold by a lot. And this is for the button strategy. After checking back the flop, as you can see, it's just the same results. The button against the small blind will be overfolding by a lot. Also, some of you might ask, but what happens if the in-position player leads less often than GTO? And we can see that the population leads a bit less often, 2% less, but we can see that the 1/3 lead on the flop will be used less often by the population. And we can see that the bigger bets will be used more often than GTO. And I think what it means is that the population tend to use bigger bets with the strong part of their range. They will bet big when they have a good hand. That's what we saw before. They tend to fast play more when they bet big. And when they bet smaller, yes, they will bet smaller less often, but it's going to be weak. So every time you see a 1/3 lead on the flop, you can go for a check raise, even though they lead less often than GTO. So let's look at some other examples. 9, 5, deuce, flush draw. We should bet big 40% of the time. The button should lead 53% of the time. Button bets. We decide to check raise. We should check raise in theory 20% of the time. Against a check raise, our opponent should call random ace jack off with the diamond, king queen offsuit with the diamond. That's crazy. I don't think people will do that. So they will be definitely overfolding the ace queen, king queen, ace jack offsuits. But because there is a flush on the flop, they will have a lot of flush draws to call with. So as always, when there is a flush draw, you cannot be that much aggressive because he will still have many good combination to call with because he has the flush draws. But when it's a rainbow board, you can check raise like crazy, I think. So let's make him still overfold. And I think he will still under 3-bet the flop. So I'm not going to make him 3-bet less, but I will make him overfold a bit. Just so he starts overfolding the ace jack, ace queen. And now as the small blind, we check raise everything. Again, I don't think you should check raise everything, but if you feel like, oh, this guy is definitely leading too many hands, especially the regs, I think the regs will lead too many hands, and then you start check raising and they will overfold by a lot. Jack Knight for Rainbow, as you can see, you should bet at really high frequency. Oh, that's funny. I didn't expect that. So on Jack 9 for Rainbow, when the button bets 1/3, the only sizing available is jam. So, you know, when you have King Queen, you just jam, and if he has Ace Jack, you have 40% equity with the 2 of a card and the gut shot. But it's really funny. I didn't expect that, so I don't think our strategy will work. I mean, it will definitely overfold against a jam, but let's try to use a smaller check raise sizing. And our opponent should call some pocket eights, some ace 10 suited, some king 9, some 7/8. What the fuck? Some pocket fives, some ace 4 suited, some ace queen. I think he will definitely overfold and probably under 3-bet the flop, but I won't change that. And now, as you can see, check raising becomes the best option. So I think your strategy should be, okay, this flop, I will see bets very often for a big size, for a small size, whatever you want. You know your strategy out of position now because we saw the sizings. But you still know that you will have to check at high frequency. But if you do check, I think you should definitely go for a check raise or check fold. I don't want to see you check calling too much because that's the biggest mistake, I think, is that when you start check calling, you will check fold the turn every time and you're gonna lose a lot of money. But if you start check raising the flop, they will be overfolding, and then on the turn, that's okay. You just give up and it's fine because they make such a big mistake on the flop. It's just like the 3-bet pots in position when you bet big the flop and you give up. But in out of position, you're gonna have to check raise instead of big bet. But the flop big bet still works pretty well, right? But since you're out of position, you're definitely gonna have to go for check raises.